and welcome to All Hands on Tech, where today's leaders talk tomorrow's technology. I'm Jeremy Morgan. I'm excited about today's episode. Today I'll be talking with Phillip Ekberg, a Microsoft C# MVP, Pluralsight author, and consultant. He's a great teacher, developer, and overall nice guy. We're going to talk about what's going on in the world of C# and .NET. We'll also talk about being a good programmer, what that means, and what new people can do to become a better programmer. So let's welcome Philip Ekberg. How are you today, Philip?
I'm very good, thanks. It's one of the few days where it's sunny here in Sweden on the spring, so it's been really good. Getting some sunlight and making the best out of the situation.
I'm very jealous. It was raining so hard here earlier that I was wondering if it was going to come through on this recording. I'm in just outside of Portland, Oregon, which is very well known for rain, so not a surprise for me. But yeah, I'm jealous of the sunshine for sure. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So for the past, since 2013, I think, I've been doing some Pluralsight videos on the side of, normal consulting and working as a software engineer. I've been mainly focusing on .NET technologies, both for, the consulting work, and I've been building apps and web and Azure and all of the things that, a .NET developer seems to jump on, right? And then on the side of that, I've been doing the Pluralsight courses, and lately I've been trying to focus a lot more on that. So actually doing less client work and focusing more on both the videos I do for Pluralsight and then my YouTube channel as well. And I'm trying to just build my online presence and share my knowledge. I love technology and love programming.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I love C#. That's why I decided to wear my C# shirt.
I had the same shirt.
Yeah, I think I got it at some Microsoft event with Subtype and kept it. It's my favorite language. Is that also your favorite language?
Yeah, well, yeah, I would say so. Especially since they seem to take, things and features from all the other languages that are pretty good. So like everything is good in C#, and then they take things from F# and Java and Python and Kotlin and Swift and all of those languages. So, if you find one thing that you love about those other languages, it'll eventually end up in C#. So, it's a living language, and I think it's my favorite one, definitely.
Nice. So how did you get started in software development?
That's a very good question. I actually don't really know exactly what put me on to, studying for software engineering. I was really inspired to move over to the US back when I prior to going to university. I really wanted to go to the US, and I loved doing computer things. Like I love playing games, and I did some networking for smaller companies in the city when I was 15, 16. So I helped out with that. And then, eventually I started, just tinkling a little bit with PHP and Java, and I took some courses during, high school, and I felt like I have a thing for this. But at the same time, I wanted to, follow my dad's footsteps, who was an electrician. So I wanted to just jump on that and do the 3-year, course for that. But then after a few weeks, I felt like this is not the thing I want to do. I want to do more computer things. I want to jump on to build more software. And I still had the idea of I want to move somewhere outside of Sweden when I grow up, So in order for me to do that, I had to graduate as a software engineer, and, like the passion for building software and learning everything about how a program works and, all of that just grew on me. Even since my childhood, I had some friends just showing me QBasic and VB and other things like that, and just, playing around with computers. But it really settled when maybe between 15 and 20 years old, I just, I found a passion for just building software and, just exploring languages and frameworks.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. That's so there's definitely like the hobbyist that gets into it, and then there's the people that are kind of pushed into it. So I was also a hobbyist. Exactly. As a teenager, I did programming, and I wasn't very good at it, if I'm being perfectly honest. But I struggled a lot, and then I decided to get into networking, and that's what I went to college for, was network administration, things like that. And then I ended up becoming a programmer. So slowly,
that's awesome.
Moved into that, and then became better at it, thankfully.
Well, there's always going to be developers that are better than yourself. Like I it's this constant imposter syndrome, right? So you come into a client's work and there's always this other person that's so much smarter and then knows so much more about the current framework or, the current language features. But it's this, I find that I love learning from others and love learning what they know and just grasping their knowledge. I can listen to other developers for hours just talking about their passion. And, it's, you don't always have to be the brightest one in the room, to succeed. And I think that's one of the things I love about software. You can just learn new things every day.
And I always try to encourage beginner software developers more now, because when I started out, it was in the 90s. There wasn't social networking, internet, any of that. And I dug into Linux source code, and I was trying to be a C or C++ developer. And so I'm jumping into Linux source code and thinking, I'm never going to build anything like this. And, it's very intimidating. So now, fast forward decades, we've got a lot more social interaction. So when I meet new beginners and they're like overwhelmed, it's like, no, I know exactly what you're feeling, and just keep pushing through it. Eventually you'll start surprising yourself. And
I remember when I started out, it wasn't like I started uni, after internet came out and all of that. So we had some really great resources. But back then they still didn't want us to have internet connection during the exams, right? They didn't want us to read the manuals for solving, framework things, things that you do in your normal work life. But then again, when I wanted to learn things myself or when I want to help others, you jump on Stack Exchange or, on that time when Stack Exchange, what's the name? It's the Experts Exchange. That's the one.
Oh, yeah.
That's the one before Stack Exchange. So Stack Overflow and all these Stack Exchange network. I remember when I studied for my software engineering degree, I sat on Stack Overflow all the night and, just answering questions, learning everything, trying to beat John Skeet to answer C# questions. And that was kind of a game to me. And that's how I learned more about the language and learned more about building software.
It's amazing.
I still see people do that. It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I think Stack Overflow has changed software development in just immense ways. And when I was a manager, as a tech manager doing interviewing, I'd have other managers that were like, kind of turned off by the idea when someone says, well, I would go to Stack Overflow. And for me, that was like a light would come on and be like, that's what I want. I want somebody that's going to go to Stack Overflow to solve the problem rather than sit and churn on it for hours on end, And
you don't always have to build the thing yourself. Like if you can bring in a NuGet package, if you can pay someone, that's built a library for you, just do that. That's going to save you a lot of money and you save a lot of time. There's there used to be this people tend to look down before, it's been a change in culture, right? So before it felt more like people looked down on you if you took something from the internet and you used that in your code. But nowadays it's more common with NuGet and all the other packages systems. It's so much more common to bring in other people's work.
Oh yeah,
and I think that's we have the open source community to thank for that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's been a positive cultural change. I would say in the early 2000s when I started with development, that attitude was prevalent. And I remember bringing in something like jQuery and people saying, well, what, you don't know JavaScript? You don't know how to do this? And it's like, no, they've done all these things for us and they've solved all these neat problems. And there was still that attitude why do we need to bring this thing in? Is that, why don't we just learn what we're doing? And it's and now there's definitely a different culture.
Totally agree with that. And jQuery is still the thing that I go to when I need to build something that's, Ajax on the web. And people still look down on the jQuery developers, which is a little bit sad. Because now we need to jump on the next thing that's even better than jQuery.
I still like jQuery. It's good for...
I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And I think what's the takeaway from that is that you should just use the frameworks and tools that make your life easier and make the product better and let you get the product out faster or as quick as possible to get to a good product. And I think that's what people seem to forget, especially I think that's something that new developers need to keep in mind, that it's okay to use frameworks that you don't have to use the thing that everyone else is using, just as long as you can solve the problem as quick as possible and, get a good product out in the end. That's what matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it comes down to problem solving. Just a couple of years ago, I was working on a project where we had really limited bandwidth between the hub and the client. And it was kind of a hub client architecture. And we were using Angular for it. And we kind of broke it down, and we're talking really small bandwidth here. It was a really weird case, but we kind of broke it down. We're like, we shouldn't be shipping Angular all the way across here when we can do, X number. I mean, we're talking probably 5 or 6 methods that we were able to recreate and do it with vanilla JS. And I met with a lot of resistance. They were just like, why are we doing this? Why are we not using the new cool thing? And it's like, trying to just solve it as simply as possible. So.
Yeah, exactly. And the same goes for, I see a lot of projects where not necessarily new developers come on, but, you have developers that might have a long experience that just learned about a new framework and they want to refactor your entire solution to now use this new framework or this new pattern or, something like that. And that's not always the best approach in software. And it's okay to build something that's not the perfect thing. You can gradually improve things. I think that's...
absolutely. I've been that developer before. I'll admit it. I'll come across something and be like, we need to use it.
Yep.
We need to use it here. And, it's fine for your personal projects. If you want to rewrite everything in .NET Core, for your personal stuff, it's great. But when you're in an organization or a business, it tends to get a little costly without good reason.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as I mentioned, like you just use the frameworks and tools that work for you. Like if it takes more time for you to rebuild the entire solution, then don't do that. But if it's going to save you money and time in the end, then it's perfectly fine. I spent 4 years with a client that were heavily invested in one of the Microsoft mobile technologies, which was Xamarin, and then it just didn't work anymore. We couldn't find any developers. We had problems building the solution. Microsoft were awesome trying to help us out, but eventually the client just said, like, let's drop this. Let's do a proof of concept, bring in some native developers. And we just rebuilt the entire application in a few months, and it was good for them. Like, that worked.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily what you need to do for all of the other situations that you're in. Like, I do a Xamarin application now for a client, and it works great for their purpose and their application. But you really have to use the tools and the technologies that work for the situation you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think prepared you for being so good at what you're doing now?
That's a hard question. Like, I don't see myself as being the brightest person in the room. So I just like to Google a lot. I like to spend time on Stack Overflow and read the documentation. And I have I don't know if I would call it a talent, but I know how to talk to people. And I think that helps when I talk to the business. And then I can also talk to the tech people. And, I can communicate what I want to build in software. And then I can Google the rest. So, even if I don't know the framework or know how to build something, I can just find it out in a matter of minutes or hours.
Yeah.
And I don't have to know how to balance a binary tree. I don't have to know how to search super quickly through a large set of data. I don't have to know how to write that on a whiteboard. That's not my type of thing. I love consulting because it lets me be picky about the projects that I'm passionate about. It also means that the clients know that they get my expert knowledge, and the way that I build software, I can find the answers quickly for them, and I don't rebuild things from scratch. I think that's what people tend to think that makes me good, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that answer, actually, and I think it gives people encouragement because, at a certain point in your career, when you've been doing it long enough, your ego will start to go away. You would think it would be the opposite, right? You think it's like, I've been doing this so many years and I've got so many things under my belt that every year I think I'm better and better. And for me, at least, and for most people I know, it kind of goes backwards. And I think it's great to hear someone admit, hey, I'm not a wizard. I've said that before several times. I'm like, I'm not Donald Knuth. If I were, you would already know it.
But, exactly.
But I could solve this problem for you and I will make this good. So yeah, I think that's a great answer.
And I've been turned down by big companies before because I didn't know how to balance the binary tree and write the code for that in Notepad. Like, it's not my type of thing, but there are people that love that and are really passionate about making algorithms faster, and that's the type of job that they should go for. Meanwhile, I love consulting and like the different types of problems and also the people problems, right? Because that's what you end up having to work with as well, especially being independent and being the only point of contact for the dev teams.
Oh, yeah. One of the questions I had was, how do you feel about whiteboard interviews?
Well, we can probably spend an hour talking about that.
At least.
So I don't think I've ever landed a job where I had to do anything on a whiteboard. Maybe that was intentional. I don't know, but I just don't find it doesn't appeal me. And when I interview someone, I never ask them to write something out on the whiteboard. It doesn't really tell me anything about their capabilities of what they're going to do in their real world, especially because I mostly work in consulting. So when I do something for a client and they want me to help out with the recruitment, I just sit in the interviews and I ask a few basic questions. If it's a mobile app developer they're looking for, I just ask a few things about, what do you think about testing? Have you tried any testing frameworks? How would you structure your application? Have you heard about MVVM? Something like that, just to give me an idea of what they like to talk about and talk about the technology instead and give me the feel of how are you as a person? Can we have a conversation rather than do you know the manual out of the box, or do you know everything about the frameworks do you know what everything compiles down to in MSIL, right? You don't have to know that. I rather just want a good person to work with that knows how to find good answers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the skills that's becoming far more important in tech year over year is the ability to communicate, the ability to not be a jerk. Like these things are really important. I know
that's important even outside of tech. Don't be a jerk ever.
That's probably every job, but I know when I first got started early years ago, the culture was definitely different, and there were definitely people that were almost unbearable to be around, but incredibly brilliant in their way, and that was acceptable. And people would say, "Well, it's a tech person, of course they're grumbly and cranky, and they're a tech person." And now I think the whole image of a tech person is entirely different, and that's good.
I think we still need the balance. So we still need the people that you generally refer to as, the seller developers that just sit around in their basements and code all day, right? So they just code around their problems and they just solve that really quickly and they do really efficient code, but then they don't really look outside of the box. So I think you need the balance. You need both of the different types or all of the different types in a team to make it good. But it's really hard. And getting someone onto the team that doesn't really fit there is going to be more costly than finding someone that you can upscale, right? Or upskill. Yeah.
And that's always tricky. I think finding a cultural fit sometimes can be a lot more difficult than finding a skills fit. And so that's why the newer programmers, I tell them, work on your communication skills, because I didn't have as great of communication skills in the beginning. And I would go and talk to a set of stakeholders and come back with an impression and come back to the team and be like, this is what they want. And we start working on it. And then later they're like, that's not at all what we asked for. And then I'm frustrated and I'm like, and so eventually you start learning to communicate a little better and start, making relationships with people, start asking the right questions so that you save yourself all of those cycles.
Yep. And having been in the tech lead role for a few years now, I love that, that you can get the ideas from the customer that what they want to build. You help them translate that into tech terminology, and then you communicate that back to the team. But then sometimes you work with people that are very narrow-minded, that really wants it their way. Like, there's no other way to build this than the way that I want it. Doing that UX thing, it sucks. So we're not going to do that in our application. But then you have to go down on the same level and try to talk to them like, this is what the customer wants. They pay you by the hour and just build what they want. It doesn't really matter what you think. But, it's all about communication. So you have to help both the developer understand as well as the client understand why the developers think that they do. And then you have to teach the developers why the managers or the business think that like they do. So I find that the tech lead role is becoming more about, previously it was more about architecture. Now it's more about people and architecture a little bit, and then a little bit of coding. At least that's what it's ended up being for me. And I think that's a fun combination of the roles. So we're no longer the people that are down in the basement doing all the coding. We're actually a part of the business, and we were talking to stakeholders and helping them build better software. It's a little bit of change in the culture and the way that we build things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a positive change. What does the C# landscape look like right now? Now, I know I'm obviously somebody that follows the language, and I know that there have been certain times where there have been groundbreaking things like, now we're pulling in generics, and now we got this new thing called Link, and we'll see how that works, So I know there have been some changes? Is there anything really big like that you've seen recently?
Yeah, there's been a bunch of big changes, and there's a bunch of big changes coming along as well. If we look at C# over the past, let's say 5 years, they announced that they were doing the compilers as an open source project. That means that they rewrote all the C# and VB compilers in C# instead, which also means they compiled the new C# compiler with the old one. So that's a little bit of a mind-boggling, but that's pretty cool. So that also meant that they have the capability of more easily adding more functionality or language features in the language. So what they've actually done is that they've added a few things that are really interesting. They've added a language first, what is called first class citizen of tuples in the language. You'll also be able to use tuples in the language, but now they're a first-class citizen and look really nice. The syntax is really good. And together with that, they've introduced pattern matching, which is something that's been available in F# and, Kotlin, Swift, Haskell, and a lot of other functional programming languages. And it's one of those ways where you can write really beautiful code to match on particular traits of an object. So you can say that I have this object, but now I want to make sure that it matches this different criteria. And based on those different criteria, we can do different things. And that's something that they're gradually improving. So with C# 7, one of the 7 releases, they released a first version of the pattern matching, and then they improved that in C# 8, and then they're going to improve it a little bit more in C# 9, 10, 11, 12, and so forth. So what's interesting with the language now is that it's the cadence of the release cycles. They're releasing new language features a lot quicker than they've previously done. Mainly because it's not really coupled to Visual Studio. It is, but it's not really. They're doing the development open source on GitHub, so they can just send you out a new compiler and you can just play around with the new features. But that also means that they kind of rely on the community and they rely on the Visual Studio teams to do the integration with the new compiler features and so forth. But what's interesting with C# 8 is that it requires .NET Core 3.0. So you have to jump onto the new runtime to be able to leverage some of the new features. And that's one of the things they've really not done in the past, or it's been a very long time since they required you to jump on a new version of the runtime to get new language features. But I think we're going to see more of that as well. And I think it's good. I think it makes sense because now you can have the .NET Core runtime side by side and you can have multiple different runtimes on the same machine, no problem. But that was a little bit trickier in the past.
Yeah, I think it's a weird transition period because if I understand it correctly, there isn't going to be a .NET Core and a .NET Standard anymore. They're kind of going to merge together and it'll just be .NET. So I think right now there's that struggle time, kind of like the Python 2 and 3 struggle that's been going on for years.
Yeah.
Like people should just expect the struggle. And,
I have to be very careful how I phrase that, but I think I would say that they're no longer doing anything on .NET Framework, and .NET Core is now becoming .NET 5. They're just scrapping the core out of it and just, making it, I guess, feature compatible with Framework, or I don't know how you would explain it, but it's not, you can't just upgrade the Framework version to the .NET 5 version from what I understand. But from now on, what you want to install on a new machine when you do new development, you want to install .NET 5.
Yeah. That's kind of how I've understood it too. And I think pattern matching is probably one of my favorite new features. As soon as you said earlier, stealing from F#, it wasn't very long ago that's what F# was doing in applications that I was working with. I remember working on a very big project and there was a lot of pattern matching and it was moved off to an F# team of a few people who were doing that. And the rationale is basically like, F# for pattern matching, we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to try to replicate what they're doing in C#.
Exactly.
So hearing that it's come in and being implemented is pretty cool. And I imagine they stole a lot of patterns from F# for that.
They certainly did. And there's still things that they want to improve and can improve upon, but it's still one of those things that people have really been missing out from F#. And I think it makes the code a lot more beautiful. It certainly makes it less chatty, and that's what most of us want. We want to write less code, but as well as expressing ourselves the same way we did before. And I think that's one of the reasons VB developers might be moving on to C# instead, because they want to be less verbose in their code.
It's very intuitive the way it works. When you look at it, it's not super confusing. Like even like Link, that I mentioned was the big cool thing. Like it's still a big cool thing, but when I first started working with it, it wasn't very intuitive for me. It was like, this kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, but eventually I figured it out, and then it started to come together. But I think with pattern matching, it looks intuitive right from the start, at least for me. When you're using it, it's like, that's pretty much how this should be written out. So
yep,
cool.
I totally agree with that.
So what kind of development
feature that they're introducing as well is the null reference types. And I think that's really worth mentioning as well. So one of probably one of the most expensive problems that have ever occurred is a null reference exception. And that's something that's probably have occurred in most applications out there. So what they're trying to do now is to warn you that there are potential problems when you compile the app, actually when you code it in Visual Studio or in Visual Studio Code, and they will just tell you that you have a potential null reference exception here. So you should probably go ahead and fix that. So that makes a lot of sense, and it's something that I hope that they're going to enforce later on. So we're going to get more immutability. We're going to make sure that people stop using null in their language and use something else. Probably fall back to something like a default value, which is pretty much the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Other problems, but it won't crash. So it's going to be probably a better experience. So I think that's worth mentioning as well. There's a ton of other things in C# 8 and C# 9 and so forth. But it's what's interesting with the compiler and the language is that it's evolving. It's not, even though C# has been around for such a long time, it's a language that's still not done. It's still taking features from other languages. It's trying to get developers from other languages to make it easier for them to transition into C#. I think that's I think it's good.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it seems like they're kind of going more towards compile time checking too, like you just mentioned, where there's a little bit more compile time checking because, I think we've all been guilty of build something and it compiles and even the unit tests pass and you're like, cool, this thing is rock solid. This is awesome. And then gets out into production and it's like, well, how did that happen? And a lot of that stuff can be solved with more compile time checking, or the compiler says, hey, this thing might happen one of these days. Maybe it won't. Maybe it will. But here it is. So that's pretty exciting stuff. So what kind of development do you do most of the time? You mentioned some Xamarin, and I know you do some WPF stuff.
Yep.
What kind of development do you do mostly with C#?
So mostly it's, lately it's been mostly towards Xamarin. It's a little bit of Azure and web. I've been heavily invested in building things using Identity Server and setting up secure ASP.NET websites and helping out with that. Some clients that I've done that for. So I'm really passionate about pretty much everything that's on .NET. And I try to, both do the web stuff and I try to still do the mobile application development as well. Because I reckon that once you're on the .NET stack, it's not too hard to move across the different techs. It's pretty similar if you've done it for a while. And it's really good to have a little finger in the game in all of them, even if you're not an expert on all the different subjects, right? So I try to do web, a little bit of mobile, do scalable things in Azure. My normal .NET consultant.
Yeah, sounds like it. That is one of the things I do like about the .NET ecosystem is, a lot of it comes back to that C# language. And I spent years building C# web API, and system apps. And then when I got thrown into a WPF project, there was certainly a learning curve, but it was made easier by knowing how the framework works already, knowing the language. Then it just came down to finding all the XAML fun stuff and things like that. But it's one of those things where if you start to learn the core parts of the .NET framework, when you move to other things, like right now with Blazor coming out, I find I'm able to build things in Blazor fairly easily because, 75% of this is stuff that from building other kinds of .NET apps. So it's pretty cool. And I like to call it an ecosystem.
And exactly. And I think that the fact that they introduce things like Blazor and they are evolving on SAML and still using flavors of SAML in different places, and they're doing Racer and using that as well, like in Blazor, and it's just, I think it's great. I think it's good that you can come from, do I dare say Silverlight, and still know how to build WPF, and you still know a little bit about how to do things in Xamarin. So even if you've been burnt by building Silverlight apps, you still have the same type of idea of MVVM, a little bit of SAML and how things are sticking together and just learn how it's applied in Xamarin, for instance. And then when you build web apps in Razor, you probably know a little bit about how to do that in Blazor as well. So it's nice to see that you can transition between the different types of paradigms and the different types of applications and still build applications that are pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. So what do you think the future looks like for the .NET ecosystem, like in the next few years? Where do you think things are going? This is always a tricky question because I always ask people to grab their crystal ball. And
yeah, well, if you would have asked me 5 or 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have predicted everything being open source, everything running on all the systems, and all of that.
I wouldn't have either.
I think that the development of the .NET framework and .NET is going to be pretty much the same going forward. You're going to see it run on more types of platforms. It's going to be faster. We'll see more native compilation, I think, so that it becomes really quick on devices that like IoT devices and devices with less cores and less memory, so they're really efficient everywhere. We're going to see probably some alternatives to Xamarin, I think, for mobile development. That's going to be the next big thing because mobility is shaping so quickly. Like PVAs or Blazor maybe take over that platform. We'll see what happens with that. But I just think that it's going to continue on this path, and we're going to see that you can choose whatever flavor of the language you want. You'll have language features from Kotlin, Swift, Java, and you can come into C# and build web apps. You can build mobile apps, and you can run them everywhere. And I think they're going to continue working on the performance and the stability. I think that's going to be the main goal for the next 5 years. But who knows? I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, I think it's going to make more inroads into the Linux community, and I might get eggs thrown at me for saying that, but that was one of the things I was really excited about with .NET Core is, I started out as a Linux programmer, then I got into .NET development. I really liked a lot of things about .NET development, and I really liked things about the Linux system. So when they merged together, I was like stoked. And now I'm even starting to see it more where people who I know who are hardcore Linux developers and hated Microsoft at one point, in time are now like, well, this .NET Core is working really well for us. It's like, that's cool. Yeah. I think it's going to make a lot of inroads into that world.
Yeah, hopefully. And I think that maybe it'll make the .NET developers that run on Windows jump on a little bit on Linux as well and explore other types of operating systems. Like when I did Xamarin, I had to buy a Mac and learn how to work with Mac OS, which is something that was outside of my comfort zone. And then as a part of that, when we decided to rewrite the entire apps in native Kotlin and native Swift, I had to learn those languages as well. So I think, as a software engineer, you have to just adapt, and it's nice to be able to learn some new platforms, learn more about how do developers on these types of platforms build their software. What are their problems? Can we learn from them and take that onto Windows, for instance, or into Visual Studio and build better things together? And I think it's great if we can grab the Linux community as well. See what happens.
Have you tried WSL at all?
Nope.
That's pretty cool. It's a good little crossover, I think, to get into Linux things because it'll run in like Windows Terminal is how I prefer to do it. But you can download
the Subsystem. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I've got that.
I probably should have spelled it out.
Sorry. Yeah, I've used the what's the full name? Is it Windows Subsystem for Linux?
Yeah, Windows Subsystem for Linux, which doesn't make a lot of sense as a term, but
no, that's true. But I've got it installed. But I do prefer using PuTTY to get into one of my Linux boxes or one of my virtual machines that are running Linux, and I don't know why, but I just like that workflow better.
Yep, that makes sense. But yeah, it is kind of a cool thing to get .NET developers more familiar with Linux by saying, and I prefer virtual machines or PuTTYing, like you said, but for some people to be able to pull Linux onto their system, play around with it, and not worry about breaking everything, because that's always the number one thing with Linux is change something and then your computer doesn't work. And
I guess it makes it easier to build cross-platform C apps as well, or C++ apps, because you can try them out, right? So that's it's a different type of application development that I'm used to, but I think it's great that you have the capability of doing that on your Windows box as well without having to worry about the virtual machines.
Yeah, definitely. So what do you think some of the challenges are with people learning C# and .NET right now? Some of the biggest challenges?
So I think that that is also a very good question. It's how do I phrase this correctly? There's always been this community that don't like Microsoft and don't like Microsoft technology, and I think there's still the $M people.
Yeah,
right.
the $M people. That's perfect.
The $M people. I think they still color a lot of new developers that want to come onto Microsoft and the Microsoft platform. So there's community that just hates on technology for no obvious reason at all. Just because something might have happened 25 years ago, it doesn't mean that Microsoft is not a changed organization. So I think that's one of the challenges, to get people trying out the Microsoft products and, just don't care about what anyone else thinks. Just build something in C#, build a web application. And it's honestly, it's one of the easiest things to learn. I think Microsoft's done a lot of good effort in building, good learning paths and good learning tools to get into the language, both for adults and for kids to learn programming. So I think there's really it's really not that hard to just start with a Hello World project. But then once you've done that, of course, Visual Studio can be a little bit overwhelming once you get into that. But it really depends on what type of application you want to build. And I think there's the challenges are probably not tech-wise, so it's probably more towards the culture of the languages and what other people in your environment are doing. Since you can jump on and learn C# on if you're on Mac, or if you're, I guess, on Linux as well and Windows, there shouldn't be any problems doing that. But people might be afraid of installing something that's from Microsoft or a Visual Studio for Mac if they haven't done that in the past. Yeah.
And I would agree with that. I refer people to an article online that Scott Hanselman wrote years ago, actually. It's Microsoft Killed My Pappy. And it's
I've seen that one.
Yeah. I said that to a lot of people because I run into some resistance sometimes online because I have followers that are from both camps, and I'll post something, they'll be like, well, you'll be stuck with the Microsoft thing. And it's like, they've done so many good things lately. I mean, I understand 15 years ago, things might have happened that people didn't like, but they've been really good with open source and really helpful and putting out a lot of good content and information for learners, I think. So,
they should definitely have credit for that. I think they've done a lot of good work on getting people on board on learning software, letting them, play around with Visual Studio, downloading, virtual machines for free and running that with Visual Studio pre-installed. They're doing a lot of things just to make it easier for you to get onto the products to then pay for it. But,
I think Azure
it's all about building. It is. Yeah. I was going to say that they just want people to build, Azure powered applications. They don't care if you run it on Linux or Mac or whatever, as long as you build it in Azure, as long as you have your backend in Azure, as long as everything is in Azure. And nothing bad about Azure. It's a great product and it's really scalable, and they're the tooling around how Azure works compared to others like Amazon. I just had a client a while back where I had to do some Amazon work as well, or AWS work. And the portals between, like, if you compare AWS to the portal for Azure, it's not even on the same planet. Like, it's so different. Maybe it's because I prefer having a UI to just click around and try new things. Meanwhile, on AWS, you might automate everything. But, it depends on what type of developer you are, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like the text-based and automation thing, but what I like about Azure is I can go in and see that UI, see how everything is put together, put something together, and then when I get what I want, and I'm like, okay, this is exactly what I want, then I can go back and script it later. Whereas with Amazon, it's kind of like you might as well start with the script with Amazon because you're not gonna figure out as much from the UI. But I mean, I feel like pretty much anybody, like anyone can jump into Azure and spend a little time with it and figure out what's going on. It's not terribly confusing. And I appreciate that about Azure also.
And that's one of the things they do with all of Microsoft products, right? They try to spend a lot of time and effort into making it understandable for someone that's not even supposed to be in that environment. And I think that's pretty impressive. So, the Azure portal is really great for, anyone can jump in there and just create a website or create a backend for your application, just click around. Meanwhile, I probably wouldn't be able to send someone that doesn't know any tech into AWS. So, it's different. And I think it's nice to see that they're putting a lot of effort into making things understandable for the less technical people that work in those environments as well. Because we're all beginners at some point. So we all need some help to get over the line.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does your learning process look like? Like if you want to learn something new, like say Blazor, how would you go about learning that if you decide like, I want to learn this, at such and such level? What is your
start
learning
off by just Googling. I'll start off by searching for how to build an app in Blazor. I'll start from there. I'll try to start a project. That's the first thing that I try to do. So Google for how to get started, then try to set up the same project or just tinker around a little bit with that. And then just go from there. I might have an idea if I want to build something, or I might actually have a client that wants me to build something on the technology. That's the best way to do it, because then I would get paid for learning the technology, but that doesn't always happen. So when I want to learn something new, I just Google for how to get started, then I tinker around a little bit, and then I just, eventually when I run into problems, I'll have to learn how to fix them, and I just end up on Stack Overflow, read the documentation, maybe watch a course on Pluralsight or just skim through that. It really depends on the technology that I want to learn and how fast I want to get there.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
In most cases, since I've got a bit of experience, I've been working in a lot of different types of applications. I kind of understand how most of the applications that I want to build, how they would work. So when I need to jump on a new technology, I kind of know where the pieces would have to fit in order to get it to work. Does that make sense? So I know where to find the answers for what I'm looking for. But when I started out, I didn't have that luxury, so I spent a lot of time on Stack Overflow. I asked questions. I tried to look for what other people asked, and I tried to find answers for what they wanted to learn. So I learned things that I might not need right now, but things that I might need in a few months or a few years from now.
So that's pretty good. I've been asking this question for to people on the podcast for a while, and so far every single person has said, find a project. So I think that's the best approach. I mean, that's what I've always done. I have this thing I call Turkey Time that I actually use, and it's this thing that's built, and it's been built in 10 different languages now, but all it is a thing that you send out to your family members before like Thanksgiving or Christmas or a holiday, saying what they're going to cook and bring. Like, I'm going to bake stuffed potatoes, and I'm going to bring the turkey. And so it's just a free-form, simple app that you can build in 10 minutes, and I've rebuilt it in several different languages because I use that as my learning thing. I'm like, okay, I want to learn how to do a Python web API, so I'll do Turkey Time, and I'll make it Python web API for it. And the current version is in Blazor that our family is using right now, because that's how I wanted to learn Blazor is this simple little app. And so, I think it's pretty good way to learn.
Find an application for your product or your project. Find somewhere where you can utilize that in your your daily routines or whatever. Otherwise, you will never jump onto it. You will never learn something that's on your to-do list if you don't build a to-do app, right? So you need to find something to build before you learn the technology.
Yeah, definitely.
So an example of that, I wanted to learn some hardware and soldering, but I bought the soldering iron, but never found anything to build. And then I found this project on GitHub where they had built an automation for the thing that controls the heating and the water in my house, that also connects into the electricity company, so I can, penny pinch on how much I pay for the electricity. So then I could get the soldering iron and learn how to put everything together. And that was a great learning experience. And then try to get the hardware to work with the software and all of that. But find a project.
Pretty cool.
I think that's good. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So I have one final question for you. And it might throw you off guard. If you were going to name a programming language, what would you name it and why?
Well, can I use one that's already existing?
I guess. Sure. There's no real rules to the question.
I would obviously go for F# because my name's Philip and it starts with an F. So that would be the obvious choice for me.
Awesome.
Otherwise, if I couldn't choose F#, I will go with M#, which would be for my daughter, which is Mila. So it's
nice. That's pretty cool. Awesome.
Something with sharp.
Something with sharp, yeah. You got to have sharp in it. Which I'm not even sure how C# got its name. Do you know how it got its name? I mean, I know C and C++ were named after the musical note, but then C# is actually a musical note, so maybe...
Yeah. I've seen an article on that. I believe it's on Wikipedia, but I can't remember. There's a long story on how they named it C#. It was supposed to be named something else, but I can't remember. I'll have to read up on that again because that's an interesting story.
Yeah.
So for who's listening, you should go and check it out because it is interesting how it got its name.
Nice. So is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't talk about?
I think we covered a lot of interesting tech stuff. We talked about the programming language and how C# is evolving and it's and how people can learn and that it's okay to not be the best developer out there like the first year of you working. So I think we covered all the bases.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for doing this with me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. It's really fun. I'm a little sad though that we couldn't do this in person because we were scheduled to do this during the summit in London, but we'll eventually meet in person as well. I'm sure.
Yeah. Next year. Hopefully we're able to do that.
Hopefully.
So that'll be cool. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here.
So that was a great conversation with Philip about everything C# and being a better developer. You can check out his blog at philipekberg.se or on Twitter at @fekberg. Thank you for listening to All Hands on Tech. If you like it, please rate us. You can see episode transcripts and more info at pluralsight.com/podcast.